everyone. Happy Thursday, and welcome to the ACLU of Pennsylvania's statewide all-membership webinar, the first of its kind. We are very excited. My name is Sarah Johnson. I use she, her pronouns. And I'm joining you all today from my office in Center City, overlooking the beautiful Comcast building, where I am so fortunate to be the Director of Philanthropy. It's really a true pleasure to be in virtual community with you all. Unfortunately, I cannot see your faces. However, I feel like I can feel your presence with this participant list. So I want to start by thanking you all for joining us today. The work we do to advance civil liberties takes all of us, staff, volunteers, clients, community partners, and supporters who are dedicated to fighting for a Pennsylvania that is better for us all. We really appreciate all you do to advance our work. So now, to why we're here today. Today's webinar will be about defending trans youth and students' right to learn. Legislators and other bodies are attempting and succeeding in limiting youth's rights, whether it's censorship of what students can learn in schools or policing their gender. Yeah, this is not okay. Joining us to speak on this topic are my inspiring colleagues, Naiymah Sanchez, Trans Justice Coordinator, Alex Domingos, Senior Organizer, Campaign for Smart Justice, and Liz Randol, Legislative Director. Our conversation will be moderated by our Director of Communications, Andy Hoover. The format for today's call will look like this. Shortly, I'll pass the mic over to our Executive Director, Reggie Shuford, for a quick welcome. We will then turn it over to our speakers for 20 to 25 minutes. And lastly, open the floor for Q&A. So with that, I'd like to turn the mic over to our Executive Director, Reggie.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks so much. I use he, him pronouns. And as Sarah said, I'm the Executive Director of the ACLU of Pennsylvania. I want to thank all of our members from all over the Commonwealth for joining today's call. I hope you're enjoying the warmer weather that we've been having. I think it's going to get really hot in the next couple of days. It's not so sunny today, but I hope that where you are, the sun is either shining or will come out soon. One of the things that is important to us here at the ACLU of Pennsylvania is increasing the diversity of our organization, every aspect of our organization, and that includes membership. With our member calls, there's often a broad range of folks who call in. Some of you have been supporting our work for decades, thank you. And some of you are newer members, thank you too. We're delighted to have all of you join us today. We always like to take the first few minutes of these conversations to provide a broad overview of our organization and the work that we do, especially for those who are newer to the organization. So for some background, the ACLU is a national nonpartisan organization founded over 100 years ago. We in Pennsylvania are a staff of roughly 40. Seems like we're growing every day. We have offices in Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and Harrisburg, and have over 40,000 members across the state of Pennsylvania, and approximately 1.75 million members nationwide. Integrating litigation, legislative and policy advocacy, organizing and communications, our staff and volunteers work both independently and in coalition with those most impacted by the issues on which we work to protect civil liberties and advance equity for all. Our work focuses on a variety of issues, including criminal legal reform, specifically decarceration, police reform, voting rights, immigrants' rights, reproductive freedom, and LGBTQ rights, all through the lens of free speech and racial justice. As a part of a recent strategic planning process, we prioritized 3 areas of focus over the next 3 years. One is decarceration, second is police reform, and third is voting rights. Although 70 to 80% of our work will be geared towards these top priority issue areas, the rest of our time is designed to allow us to remain nimble, to be able to respond to whatever emerging threats are happening, really such as the ones that we'll be discussing today. All of our work incorporates the concept of ABIDE, which is authentic belonging, inclusion, diversity, and equity, and also incorporates racial justice. So now to the topic of our call today. Across the country, we are facing a surge of discriminatory legislation and policies that target trans youth and students' right to learn free from censorship. In just the last several months, state lawmakers have proposed more than 200 anti-LGBTQ measures in 35 states, overwhelmingly aimed at trans youth, and more than 110 measures across 33 states that would restrict discussions about race, gender, and sexual orientation in the classroom. At the same time, politicians and school boards are moving to ban books from public schools and libraries, largely by Black and LGBTQ authors. And as the country goes, Pennsylvania goes as well. It's no different, unfortunately. In the Commonwealth, some school boards, school administrators, and legislators are working to censor education and limit the rights of trans youth. They're attempting to erase the legacy of discrimination and lived experience of Black and brown people, women and girls, and LGBTQ individuals in the classroom. These bills and policies are gaining traction, and they not only paint a limited and fictitious narrative of America, they limit students' rights to bring their whole authentic selves to school, whether it's in the classroom or on the playground. As mentioned during our last call, which was in January of this year, the ACLU of Pennsylvania has a long history of working on issues affecting students. We believe strongly that every young person should be able to see themselves and feel included in a school environment, in and outside of the classroom. So what is the ACLU currently doing to address efforts to undermine inclusive education and the rights of trans youth? Well, you're about to hear some of that work now from our stellar colleagues working in this arena, who will tell you what some of those efforts and that work looks like. So Naiymah Sanchez, Alex Domingos, and Liz Randol will be our staff who will be discussing these issues during today's call. And they will be moderated by another stellar colleague, our Director of Communications, Andy Hoover. So with that, I'm delighted to turn it over to Andy.
Thanks, Reggie, and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here with you. I really appreciate the chance to talk with our members and supporters about this really important issue. And I'm pleased to be here to help guide us through the dialogue. As Reggie mentioned, I'm Andy Hoover. I'm Director of Communications for the ACLU of Pennsylvania. I'm based in our Harrisburg office, use he, him, his pronouns. And Alex, Naiymah, and Liz, great to have you here as well to share your expertise. So can't wait to hear all of your insights about what's happening, if the three of you could join us. All right, awesome. Hey, Alex, there we go. We're all here. All right, awesome, great. So I just wanted to start. I think it's really important for our members to at least have a little bit of background about what our staff does. So before we get into the questions and what we're dealing with on these issues around trans rights and censorship in schools, I actually want to just open it up just for a moment for each of you to say what you do, your title, where you're located, and maybe just a couple sentences about what your job is like. Naiymah, why don't you go first?
Thanks, Andy. So hi, everyone. I'm Naiymah Sanchez. I use she, her pronouns. I am actually the trans rights organizer now with the ACLU of Pennsylvania, and I am located in the Philadelphia office. And those are the birds. They're going to chime in a lot during this webinar. So just giving that disclaimer. But my work entails not just fighting for our trans rights and our identity, but how it intersects with all of the campaigns that we work on at the ACLU. So if it's immigrant rights, voter rights, reproductive rights, the school to prison pipeline, all of this intersects with trans identity. And my job here at the organization is to make sure that we are incorporating that intersectionality, as well as organizing in community when local hot spots, fires pop up from legislative pushes. And I will pass it back.
Thanks, Naiymah. Alex is my fellow comrade in the Harrisburg outpost, which sometimes feels like the wild frontier. So Alex, what about you? Tell us a little bit, about yourself.
Hey everyone, Alex Domingos, he, him. Like Andy mentioned, we are part of the small but mighty Harrisburg contingent. With my work for the Campaign for Smart Justice, the majority of it is focused on our smart justice priorities, which are reducing the prison population in Pennsylvania while simultaneously fighting racial disparities in that population. Like Naiymah said, though, there's a lot of crossover. So I also do some work in our immigration arena, fighting against immigration detention in the state and sort of the intersection there between immigration detention and criminalization. And then as evidence as my participation here today, I also work a bit in our inclusive education fights that are popping up across the state.
And Liz, you have the fun job of dealing with people in that building in the image over Alex's shoulder, the dreaded L word lobbyist. Tell us a bit about your work.
Hi, everybody. I'm Liz Randol. I use she, her pronouns. I am the legislative director. And as Andy mentioned, that gives me the enviable position of being the representative lobbyist for the ACLU in Harrisburg. So I am based I split my time between Philadelphia and Harrisburg. So I'm sort of a Harrisburg outpost interloper. And so I have a nice office there. I just don't get to see it very often or spend much time in it because I spend most of my time, certainly during session weeks and sometimes on off weeks inside the Capitol. So it's always interesting. It always keeps me grounded, remembering, how bad things can actually be sometimes. So I think sort of spending a lot of time under the dome, as some of us will say, it's always a sort of welcome, sort of gets us out of at least me, out of my bubble sometimes to make sure that we keep focused on where some of the real threats are coming from. And it certainly happens frequently in our legislature on a regular basis.
So speaking of threats, let's talk about the topic that we're here today to talk about, which is it's an overlapping set of threats, I suppose. We're seeing efforts to roll back trans rights, especially for youth, and to censor content in schools all over the country. So I wanted to set the scene here first. What kind of challenges are we seeing in Pennsylvania? Where are they happening? This all looks very coordinated. And I'll kick that to whoever wants. Go ahead, Naiymah.
Oh, well, thanks, Andy. So yeah, I mean, we're seeing in the legislature, attempts through legislation to deny trans girls the right to participate in school athletics. And even though we see that this type of initiative is being pushed nationwide, and we have a governor who promised a veto, it doesn't stop local school districts from creating havoc on their students through these attempts from the legislator.
Yeah, and sort of piggybacking off of that, we see efforts in a variety of different individual school districts focused on changing curriculum to prevent difficult but necessary discussions of America's history, removing books from libraries that deal with issues of race or gender identity, forcing teachers to remove pride flags or other displays of support for traditionally marginalized communities, making it difficult for kids to go by their preferred names and their pronouns, and failing to adequately respond to incidents of in a widespread culture really of harassment and bullying of students. So we've seen these issues pop up in districts from Central York to Bucks, really all over the state. We're receiving intake and complaints of sort of similar issues cropping up in districts.
And Alex and Naiymah, where has this push to ban books and conversations about race and gender in PA schools come from? I mean, you've talked about some of the districts, Alex and Naiymah. You mentioned the state legislation, but in a more global sense, is this something that's new? Has this happened before?
Well, I think it's important to note that these issues and sort of the benefit of us, having our affiliate structure, but also being in conversation with our allies like in other states is that it's very clear that these efforts are coordinated and copied from state to state. We see the same or very similar types of organizations using the same tactics, targeting the same exact books, the same exact concepts, and the same groups of people from state to state. So across the country, really, ACLU affiliates are combating book bans, censorship, and hostile environments for Black, Brown, and LGBTQ and T kids. So here in Pennsylvania, we're seeing most of that action at the local level, but as Naiymah and Liz will both speak about, there's also activity in the legislature that, depending on who our next governor is, may or may not become like a larger focus. So, yeah.
So Naiymah, we've seen numerous efforts to roll back the rights of trans folks, while at the same time, groups like ours are trying to expand protections and we've advocated for policies that are more inclusive. But over the years, we've seen a variety of struggles around folks who are trying to make things harder for trans folks. So with that in mind, what do you think are the motivations behind these attacks on trans youth in particular? And why has it escalated so dramatically in the last year?
So I think the motive behind it is all political gain. They elected officials are using the most marginalized and fear mongering to create a gain for themselves, the imprint in their base, reasoning why they need to be elected. And this isn't a Democrat versus Republican kind of conversation, but it is ideal to understand that folks are using marginalized individuals to uplift themselves. And why in the last few years we're seeing an upkick in legislation and more anti-trans rhetoric coming from local, we have to acknowledge that we come out of 4 years of an administration that took a specific target on trans folks, like attempting to ban trans folks from access to the military, to censorship around the census and how we collect data on all folks here in the United States to access to healthcare.
It does seem to be an evolution of struggles over time. I've been here at the ACLU for almost 18 years. And when I started, we were dealing with proposals to amend the state constitution to ban marriage equality. Then we win marriage equality. Then you start getting into fights over trans folks being able to use bathrooms or locker rooms that based on their gender identity. And now we're talking about participation in sports and access to healthcare, even for young people. I do want to pivot to the legislature because Naiymah, you mentioned some bills that are in the legislature. So Liz, can you tell us a little bit about what kind of legislation you're seeing, both to limit inclusive education and also to roll back trans rights?
Sure. So one of the things I'd like to at least point out broadly before I mention the specific bills that we've seen is that these are all responses to non-existent problems, right? So what you have is, Alex had mentioned that there are, that we see some duplication of efforts across states, that some of these seem to appear to be sort of based on model legislation. As anyone who might be familiar sometimes with some legislators, they don't read their bills that closely. And so sometimes they can propose bills that are too generic, are not specific really to Pennsylvania, would clearly be in violation of the Constitution, which I think the bills that I'm about to mention are, none of which appears to be, pose a problem for some of these legislators. So, what is frustrating is that many of them, bills like these tend to be messaging documents in many regards, and again, are not trying to really iron out specific solutions to any really identifiable problem. And so to that end, I'll just briefly mention, there's one, I'll sort of dispense with this Anti-Crt Bill, quickly. It is fortunately not moved. It is House Bill 1532. The prime sponsor of that is Representative Russ Diamond. The bill has 33 co-sponsors in the House. And it still remains in House Education. So it has not even been scheduled for a vote in its originating chamber. So we haven't seen it move, but it would it would prohibit the use of any public funds in state universities, primary and secondary schools to express, quote unquote, or publish any, quote, racist or sexist concept. It would prohibit professors from teaching such concepts. It would require students to express such concepts or to provide a venue, or also providing a venue for a speaker who advocates such concepts. It says that no students may be required to read or view any learning materials that espouse such concepts. All of this, of course, is clearly and blatantly unconstitutional. It's viewpoint discrimination, censorship, and clearly an assault on academic freedom. So we have that is fortunately still sort of sitting in committee and has not moved. Just transitioning over to the trans ban. We have a pair of bills that are largely the same. One in the House, often the legislature will introduce sort of companion bills in both chambers, but the one that has moved is House Bill 972, and it has several prime co-sponsors, Representatives Gleim, White, Gatos, Kiefer, and Borowitz. And this legislation would, I'm sorry, got a cat situation. Would ban transgender girls and women from participating on athletic teams or in sports that are designated for females, women, or girls. It would apply to students participating in teams or sports sponsored by a public primary or high school, a public institution of higher ed, or any school or institution where students or teams compete against a public school or college. There's a companion bill in the Senate, as I mentioned, Senate Bill 1191, whose prime sponsor is Senator Judy Ward. I will mention, however, and Naiymah will probably talk a little bit more about this, but House Bill 972 passed the House on April 12th by a vote of 115 to 84, with 4 Democrats voting in favor of the bill, and there was 1 Republican who opposed it. And so, that one that happened sort of right before the primary. And so we were somewhat hoping that maybe this was just a wait. I mean, I say hoping, but, we're thinking that perhaps this is just going to be an effort that was cabined largely to help people shore up support in their primary races, but we never take any of these things, unseriously. And clearly they're a threat, not just in terms of the threat. We know that the governor would veto those bills. The problem is, of course, anytime you have messaging like this and conversations, it creates real damage. I mean, people watch these proceedings, they hear about it in the news. And so it has, a real human, genuine effect on the people whose lives would be affected, not just the actual people directly, but the parents of some of the kids. And so it's, it creates real damage. So even though from a narrow perspective, we are not necessarily we are confident that the governor would veto these bills, that still does not reduce the amount of damage that results from running bills like this.
Well, Naiymah, I want to ask you about that. I want to ask you about the implications of this legislation. But first, I want to ask you a more affirmative question. There are schools out there that do have inclusive policies. So could you say a little bit about the value of inclusive policies in education for trans youth, and then maybe comment on the impact that would have that is having because of these bills, the fact they even exist, and if they would become law someday, what the negative impact would be. So start with the positives of inclusive policies.
Yes. So we have policy 252 here in Philadelphia School District that is a trans and non-binary inclusive policy, which recognize a student's name and pronoun usage in the classroom. And there was an addition to that for the Zoom option during COVID, which affirms a young person. And we see in countless data that shows a less affirmative environment, education environment creates less safety for a young person, where they're more likely to drop out. And we see those numbers increasing when it pertains to a LGBTQ, especially a trans student, when there are policies that are not creating affirmation and safety that prevents bullying and harassment by students and teachers, the young person is high likely not to attend classes and or graduate. And when we, I went from the positive and drove right into the negative, like a spiral effect. But I mean, it does have a detrimental impact on marginalized young folks, especially trans youth, because without education, you can't get a job. Without a job, you can't get housing. Without housing, you know, the sense of security and housing, you know, you have all lost cause for yourself. You're just surviving, you know, on a day to day. And that's why it's important that we create policies. And I truly apologize about the birds. They are going off. The weather is warming up, so they are reacting to the birds outside. But that's why it's essential that we continue to advocate and promote positive policies like policy 252, which ideally we set up as a model policy throughout other school districts that creates that sense of security and affirmation, so that young people just feel ready to learn, to thrive, and to grow into who they are. You know, and the situation with the banned trans sports, you know, there's a lot that goes into being a part of athletic team, and that is learning to be a team player, you know, learning to compete, you know, strategizing on how to win, right? And that's something that you gain in these learning environments as you grow into adulthood. So when we see bills like Senate Bill 1191 or House Bill 972 moving along, again, even though we know that the governor will definitely veto any anti-trans or targeted bills that deny marginalized youth access, it creates a pathway or narrative for local school districts to enact local policies that are not in favor, right? I mean, you have parents that's under attack, but also the teachers that support these students, right? And it doesn't work out for any of us, the instructor nor the student.
And I'm glad you mentioned Philadelphia's policy. I mean, there are schools around the state that have been supportive of trans students. A few years ago, we had a case in Boyertown where the school was doing the right thing with policies that allowed students, ensured that students could move about their day based on their gender identity, based on the restrooms and locker rooms they use, their sports participation. We had a client who actually, he was a boy at the time, now he's a young man, who participated on the boys cross country team. On the other hand, not that far away, right now in Bucks County, in Central Bucks, Alex is right there in the middle of it, where it almost seems like they're trying to, they're creating a hostile environment for trans and LGBTQ students. I do want to ask Liz and Naiymah a question that is off script, so hope I'm not putting you on the spot here. But Liz, when you were talking about the primary sponsors of that House bill, I was thinking to myself, I was noting that all of those sponsors that you mentioned are cisgender women. And this is an area of contention where it's clear the supporters of these ideas are trying to pit cis women against trans women. And I just wanted to make that comment and offer both Liz and Naiymah a chance to respond to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll also note that many of those sponsors also were co-sponsors of the Anti-Crt bill, so FYI. But so, you know, I mean, we've seen this kind of tactic. It's fairly clever in some ways, I would say, in terms of legislators filing and introducing bills that will pit natural allies against one another in many ways. So when we've seen, say, for example, abortion bans that that target banning abortions after a fetal diagnosis of Down syndrome, for example. So what happens is that you'll have reproductive rights and equality advocates seemingly, but not really. I think their hope was to split the reproductive rights community and the disability community, right? So what they're trying to do is, identify some of those cracks and those wedges and use those to exploit, perhaps existing tension, to try to invent tensions where none necessarily exist, and to leverage those in terms of trying to split where there might be natural alliances or allegiances or people working in coalition and community with one another. And it's really, a pernicious and I think kind of ghoulish way of advancing, legislation, honestly, that doesn't fix any identifiable problem. Naiymah, what do you think?
I mean, you said it clear. I mean, divide and conquer is the tactic, right? And we also seen the same tactic with the restroom access, pushes, right? And it's specific around trans girls, cis women, trans women, and there is this need from folks who push these narratives to say that if trans women or trans girls have access to female women or girls' restrooms, then cis women are less safe. When the data, again, we go back and the data from the National Center for Trans Equality shows that trans folks, especially trans women, have been highly at a higher rate assaulted while using affirmative restroom access, and or one that they're forced to use by gender assigned or sex assigned at birth. So it's just a divide and conquer and this need to create this dialogue that one class of folks is less safe if another class of community members have access to.
And on this issue of pitting cis women against trans women, shout out to some of our partners who are historically cis women led, but they're not buying this. Women's Law Project, Pennsylvania Coalition Against Rape, Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence, they all are opposing this legislation that's trying to diminish trans rights. So I want to ask any of the three of you, and all three of you are welcome to weigh in. Can you say a bit about what the ACLU is doing to support students' education rights and to support trans rights? Who wants to go first with that one?
I can hop in, give Naiymah and Liz a chance to get some water and rest for a second. So particularly with the inclusive education effort, we've spent a ton of time connecting with students, connecting with parents, and concerned community members, as well as an array of our allied community organizations. A big part of, I know Naiymah and I's work is working in coalitions, building partnerships, and really calling on those partnerships whenever hot button issues like this arise. So be it through organizing and advocacy, through comms support, thank you very much, Andy and folks, and whether, or accepting and monitoring legal complaints that we receive through a variety of different ways. We're working on building a network of organizations that can pool our resources and our expertise together to be a resource for these students and parents and school district employees. So as part of that work, we encourage concerned parents and community members that see censorship of students or book bans or drastic and harmful curriculum changes to continue to reach out to us and file complaints. It is through the work and intel that we get from you members and chapter members as well, of how we get our information.
Naiymah and Liz, did you want to add anything to that?
I think Alex said it, clear. I mean, our position is to build power within community so that we're not needed, right? We come in and help with strategizing, but to build the power within folks in their own community to take control of their civil liberties is essential, right? And we can't do this work without the folks on the ground, grassroots organizers, whether they be family members or just other community members. We all are organizers in this movement of community liberation across the Commonwealth.
I'm glad you mentioned that local organizing, because the most effective campaigns are the ones that happen at the local level. We saw that in Central York for our members on this webinar. If you didn't follow that story, last year there was a ban on certain types of materials, mostly related to race or LGBTQ issues, and it was the students. It was students who led the pushback and ultimately got that list repealed. I wonder if you could say a little more about how ACLU supporters can get involved. And there is a question in the chat which kind of is connected to this. The question in the chat is, how can we educate family and friends who just don't get it? And you can address that, but also maybe speak a little bit about anyone on this call who wants to get involved and be a part of these issues and pushing back on the attempts at censorship and diminishing trans rights. What can an individual do?
I'll just start with one of the easier ones, I suppose, hopefully, but I'll put a link in the chat. We have started what we are referring to as our Advocate Academy that encourages people. We will train people to get how to sort of make phone calls, to be more regularly in touch with your legislators, both in the House and the Senate. And this is sort of, we do our alerts for major bills that are running that are sort of some of the biggest threats, but by joining the Advocate Academy, it's usually people who want a little bit more regular updates on bills, legislation that's moving, updates on training. And so sometimes it's on skill-based, sort of how to lobby your legislator, but also around different issues, getting people up to speed on that. So thank you, Sam, for posting the link to that. And I'll just also say, just given the fact that we're hot on the heels of a primary election, I cannot miss the opportunity to underscore how insanely important it is to pay attention to your representatives in the state legislature. I know that a lot of the shiny focus is always on on Congress, on Senate, but this go around, governor and your state legislators is so critically important, particularly for those of you who care about the work that the ACLU does. Almost everything that we work on is controlled by and decided by the legislature. That's everything from these education types of issues to voting rights, to criminal legal reform, abortion, you name it. These are all things that happen at the state and local level. So I just cannot, so please make sure that you vote and make sure you pay attention to all of those races.
And just to piggyback off of that, definitely +1, +1,000 to what Liz said. Frankly, before I started working here, I didn't realize really everything that happened at the state legislative level. And like Liz said, really everything we're working on is touched by the state legislature. Particularly for these school board issues that I've been speaking about, a lot of it is even more granular and it comes down to local politics. So elected school boards are driving this. Folks who have been seeking to really just make life harder for marginalized people have done really well at organizing and getting elected to school boards. So if you're a parent, at a local school district, we definitely need you paying attention to school board races, understanding candidates' positions around these important issues, showing up to your local school board meetings and letting them know that you don't support censorship and that education should be inclusive of all students' experiences and backgrounds. Just by following us and by following local news, figuring out ways to support the students in your area that are fighting back, whether it be free libraries that are being set up, or if they're hosting demonstrations, showing up and being part of that. A lot of this really really comes down to the local level, and you as constituents have that power, have that influence. And these lesser known races that get a lot fewer votes in some of the national elections we pay attention to, your voice really goes a long way.
And to go even more local, the kitchen table, you know, the front stoop. Naiymah, could you say a little bit about this question we got about even engaging with family and friends who don't get it?
Yeah, 100%. And, you know, you have family members and friends who will support you till the wheels fall off. And then you have some folks who say, yeah, but, and what I would say is, you know, don't waste your energy if these folks are not movable, but continue to love and support them. And also if on a level of getting this family member or community friend or community member and friend to see what you share as commonality, whether it's pertaining to LGBT rights or your support for LGBT people, and sharing why your concerns are where they're at, right? Getting, you know, you can move people and persuade people, if you may, by understanding what we all share, like the safety. And also, you know, we all love our kids. You know, we want the best for our kids, especially our young folks. We want them to be able to grow and thrive, just like a cis student needs to have a safe and affirming environment. A trans student as well needs that safe and affirming environment so that they can grow and thrive into their best adulthood, their best I am. But for folks who will continue to butt you down to the ground, you know, love them and love them from a distance.
Can I just add to, just because Naiymah did such a great job when we had a few years ago trying to beat back a bill that was attempting to cut trans healthcare from the CHIP reauthorization, the Children's Health Insurance Program reauthorization. And I'll just say this, and this is something that actually applies to, you know, how you try to convince even legislators, but hearing from people who are directly impacted, and that can be, you know, a trans girl who's playing on a team to a parent of a trans kid. You know, anytime you can have a conversation with someone who this is actually affecting. Like I said, these are almost wholly invented problems that don't have real world, they're not tethered to anything that's a problem that anybody has identified, other than to sort of, you know, trade on the negative partisanship that we see in our current politics. And so, you know, the way that when we went to Harrisburg and Naiymah brought, you know, we just went with an entire crew. And then again, recently when this bill was voted on, the trans ban, the sports ban bill, you know, legislators have a very different response when they have to actually talk to people whose lives are affected by it and realize that none of this is as simple as the messaging. None of this is sort of, you know, everything's on fire and we have to fix this yesterday. And so you know, having conversations about what it's like from someone's perspective, rather than trying to give them persuasive arguments in favor of or in opposition to, and just allowing somebody to tell their story, can be incredibly effective.
So Liz, you
I also
mentioned,
think it's important that, yeah, I was just gonna say, I also think it's important that these efforts sort of seek to divide us, right? And even though they're seemingly focused on specific communities, they affect us all, right? So like banning trans people from playing sports, right, affects cis women as well, right? There's people who will get caught up in that. When parents seek to ban books for the entire population, like instead of just opting their child out of renting a book from the library, they're depriving that information and that learning experience from all students and things that we all benefit from. So really inclusive education benefits everyone. And I think it's a useful sort of perspective to share with people who don't understand it, and that, you know, the folks who are purporting to be protecting people are really trying to divide and pit people against each other and deprive students, whereas inclusive education and safe environments, safe schools really benefit us all.
So Liz, you mentioned the legislative and gubernatorial races. We have a question. This might be a spicy question, so I'll just I'll toss it to you. What would a new governor mean for this fight? And we now know who the nominees are. And before you answer that, I will note that the ACLU is a nonpartisan organization. We do not have a political action committee. As a matter of policy, we do not endorse candidates. That does not mean that we ignore facts. So having said that, what would a new governor mean for this fight?
Look, I think there's no question that, having a trifecta, as we sort of colloquially refer to it as, which means that both chambers of the legislature and the governor's mansion are controlled by the same party, would be absolutely ruinous. I think, in the post-primary, knowing who the nominees are for each, who's going to be facing off. I mean, we saw, to be honest, Doug Mastriano's sort of day one agenda in his speech following the closing of the polls and the sort of obvious, him locking in the primary nomination. And so, he started immediately with, on day one, CRT is over. That was like his first, literally like the first thing that he said. And then the next thing was, and then on day one, he's going to make sure that biological females can only play on, those teams. And so he just, I think it would, I don't think I can explain the kind of ruinous catastrophe that would ensue. And largely because we've seen, Mastriano has been in the legislature, so we've sort of been watching his antics, and is an incredibly inflammatory, kind of unhinged from many, from say facts, from evidence. And so this is not about, I would say in some ways, this is not even really about partisanship. It's about illiberalism. What some of the things that he focuses on in terms of how he would work to undermine election-related issues are anti-democratic and illiberal. And so it's not just about having a difference in partisan perspective, but really untethering many of the ways that we would proceed with any of our procedures, how our institutions operate. The governor in Pennsylvania appoints the head of the Department of State. So the person who's controlling elections gets appointed that way. The kind of undermining of normal procedures, the rule of law, any of those kinds of things would be, it would be nothing really short other than catastrophic. So.
That's pretty clear. We do have a question. Our focus on these issues has been largely on students and the impacts on students. We do have a question about teachers, and Alex and Naiymah, you've had some interactions with folks at the local level. So if you can't answer this is okay, but we did have a question asking how have these efforts to undermine inclusive education affected teachers?
We've seen one that was most recently in the news. I believe that was in Montgomery County, Andy, where there was censorship over the teacher, and she was they were ultimately suspended.
In Bucks County.
Yeah, so, and the students are organizing around that suspension and also the censorship of the teacher, and how the teacher on a level is being inclusive and affirming of their students. And I think that just to tie it into the following question, I don't know if you want me to jump into that, or Alex, if you want to answer this question really quick.
Yeah, the question about if folks hear something happening in their district, how do they reach out? We have that question as well, which is connected here.
Yeah, so I say if the school has a GSA, connect with the GSA leader and or your local community-based organization, nonprofit, LGBT focused, and or reach out to us at the ACLU. You can, we're all, I guess, Googleable at this point. You could file a complaint with the ACLU or reach out personally to myself or Alex or any of the organizers at the ACLU, and we will help strategize solution-based resolution.
Yeah, and if someone has a legal complaint that our legal department needs to review, we do have an intake form online. It's at aclupa.org/intake, aclupa.org/intake to reach for a situation that is a legal complaint. Alex, are there any other ways that you would recommend folks connecting with us if something comes up in their district?
I think the complaint's a good way to do it. I think there's also, the offices have their sort of individual email addresses too, right? So you can reach out to whatever your local, the closest one to you will be at Philly, Harrisburg, or Pittsburgh. And those get routed to us as well, like the info at ACLU.
Exactly, info@aclupa.org. We have a colleague who monitors that daily. So if something comes in, our colleague will be able to direct it to whoever needs to see it. But there's a question here about what's GSA. Naiymah, do you want to just give a quick GSA 101?
Sure, just a quick verb. It can be a GSA or a QSA, depending on the score and what language the students want to pick, but it's a group inside the school, queer, straight alliance, or gay straight alliance. It's a club, just create affirmation and create that sense of security within students and their education environment. But they're also been the driving force behind pro policies and preventing anti-policies from moving forward.
So we have time for one more question, and I'll throw this to all three of you. What have we learned from other states fighting this battle that has informed how we approach our work in this area? There's a lot happening out there, from Florida to Idaho.
Networking and coalition work, because we can't do this alone. And I think that no matter if it's LGBT related, immigrant rights, I mean, whatever movement work we're doing, what I personally learned from watching other organizers in other states fight back against anti-trans legislation is that they've done it with a unit of collective input of folks. And it wasn't a big I, it was a we, the big we.
And I'll say too, to echo what Naiymah is saying, is that, the kind of work that Alex and Naiymah do, while I have my sort of head buried in the legislature, is doing a lot of the early, laying the groundwork for building those kinds of coalitions. And I think, one of the things that personally I have become much more acutely aware of and sensitive to is how important it is to start engaging in those conversations early, because the easiest way that you exclude the people that you need to hear from the most and that need to be the most involved in this work happens, like the easiest way for them to get excluded is when something is an emergency. So if something is like, oh my gosh, hair on fire, everybody's got to run and respond immediately, we all default to our normal contacts, the normal way that we proceed with doing some work, how we respond, what we say. All of those things should be informed by and shaped by the people whose lives are being directly affected by this. And so I've just become much more, it's watching that happen and seeing how easy it is to have people just get left out of the conversation when we want them to be involved. But that means you have to do it early, and you have to build those relationships and have those conversations early on, so that you're not calling someone out of the blue trying to explain not only what's happening, but who the hell you are, right? And why they should trust you with having this conversation. And so I just wanted to sort of give a shout out to my colleagues for doing that kind of, on a consistent and persistent basis that allows for much more rapid response on the, when I'm in the legislature, that I could not do as effectively or seamlessly without the kind of groundwork and the kind of consistent organizing that they do. So.
As per usual, Naiymah and Liz are right on the money. It's organizing with the grassroots, building coalitions and partnerships to marshal all of our resources and building those relationships on the ground. And again, thank you for the support of our colleagues and for the members of helping us do that and allowing us to do that.
And let me close by saying, the support that our members give us, as Alex said, is crucial, because not only does it support the ACLU of Pennsylvania, it supports the national office. At the national office, we have colleagues who have, excuse me, tremendous expertise. They're strategizing on the legal issues. They're doing messaging research. They are a tremendous resource for us here at the state level to figure out how to navigate through these issues. So with that, Alex, Naiymah, Liz, thank you, all three of you. Your work is brilliant, and we really appreciate your insights. Thank you again to the members that were here today. We hope you found this discussion fruitful and informative. And Sarah, now we're sending it back to you.
Thanks, Andy, though. I want to thank Andy because if anyone likes how well he navigated this conversation, you should definitely subscribe to our podcast. Really, because Andy does a tremendous job at talking about all these issues, but also teeing up really good questions. So thanks, Andy.
Thanks, Liz.
It's so true. Wow. What a great, rich discussion. So thanks all for who participated. Thanks for those great questions from the audience. And again, thank you, Reggie, Andy, and Naiymah, Alex, Liz, for being with us today and dropping all your knowledge and passion. So I also want to give an extra huge thank you to our colleague, Sam Jen, who has been keeping us all organized and running the tech behind the scenes for this first webinar. We'd love your feedback, so please make sure to fill out the survey at the end of this webinar. Lastly, certainly not leastly, thanks again for all of you for joining us. We are grateful for your past and continued support of our work. We could not do it without you. It's just the truth. So if you're able to consider a gift today, please visit www.aclu-pa.org/donate. I'm sure Sam will, there it is, to make a tax-deductible donation. And again, we appreciate you. So with that, I'll end the call for today. Thanks, everyone. Be well, and I wish you a great rest of your day. Bye.